election of Good morning. Good morning, members. Welcome to this meeting of the Licensing Subcommittee. Item 1 on this morning's agenda, election of chairman. Can I have a proposal?
Councillor Flagg.
Thank you. All in favour? Thank you. Item 2 on this morning's agenda, apologies. To receive apologies for absence from members, I think we need to probably just record apologies from Councillor Farquhar, who spoke to Councillor Kelsey with regards to standing in as substitute this morning. Members happy with that? Yep, thank you. Declarations of interest. Do members have any declaration of interest for this morning's on this morning's agenda? No. No. Right. In which case, then, item 4. Would you like to? Good morning, everyone. I'd just like to ask the officer just to do a bit of housekeeping measures first of all.
Thank you. Please note that this meeting is being audio recorded by the Council for the purposes of publishing on the Council website in due course. Please can I remind councillors and officers to use their microphones when speaking. There are no scheduled fire alarm tests. If the alarm goes off, please leave the building by the way of the nearest exit, signposted, and make your way to the front of the Town Hall building, and I shall follow you out, so just follow me. And finally, please can we make sure mobile phones are switched off or turned to silent for the duration of the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I'm Councillor Flagg, the elected chairman for this morning's meeting, and I'm joined by Councillor Beverley Dunlop and Councillor David Kelsey. Could I possibly ask everyone who sat at the table just to introduce themselves, please? I think you just need to press the button on the microphone.
Michelle Fletcher of the Licensing Authority.
Louise Busfield, Police Licensing.
Gareth Gosling, Police Licensing.
I'm Philip Day. I'm a solicitor from Lacey's and I'm here to represent the premises. To my immediate left is a lady called Liliana Ostrowska, whom I'll tell you a bit more about later. To my immediate right is Tomasz Jodlewicz, who is currently the DPS at the premises, and beyond him is Mrs. Dorota Wojtas, and I'll tell you a bit more about her as well at the appropriate time.
Hi, I'm Andrew Williams, Head of Safer Communities, BCP Council.
I'm Linda Cole, solicitor at Bournemouth Borough Council.
Sarah Rogers, Senior Licensing Officer, Bournemouth Borough Council, BCP Council.
Michelle Cutler, Democratic Services. I'm the clerk for today.
I'm Joanne McNamara, Senior Lawyer, BCP Council, and I'm Legal Advisor today.
Thank you. And we also have Officer Miss Nicola Hooley, who's sitting in this today just to observe the function of the subcommittee. Right, could I ask the applicant, please? Oh, sorry, no. The officer to introduce the item. Thank you.
Thank you. Application is being made by Dorset Police for a review of the premises licence under Section 51 of the Licensing Act 2003 for Riviera Bar and Restaurant on the grounds that they believe the premises are not upholding the Prevention of Crime and Disorder licensing objective. The review application was lodged following incidents of significant disorder occurring as a mismanagement in addition to a number of breach licence conditions. The police state they have no confidence in neither the licence holder or the DPS. Mr Day, acting on behalf of the licence holder, has initiated mediation with the police, and a copy of Mr Day's email has been distributed to you prior to this hearing. No formal response by way of update was received, but I understand that the discussions have been taking place this morning, which we shall be updated of. Members are reminded that any powers exercised by them must be necessary and appropriate for the promotion of the licensing objectives and directed at the causes of concern, which the application identifies once these have been established through this hearing. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr Day, would you like to address the committee, please?
Yes, thank you. I'm pleased to tell you that, subject, of course, to the decision of this committee, we have reached an agreement with the police, although it has been it's been a lot of work to get there. The starting point was that the licence here was held by a gentleman called Mr. Singh, whose company owns the freehold of this entire building. I gather that for historical reasons, the licence for the ground floor premises, and it incorporates the basement as well, had always been held by the freehold owner rather than the people actually operating the business. And when Mr. Singh bought the freehold, that continued. You will have seen from the papers, and I'm not going to go through them in any detail at all, that over a period of time, council licensing officers, including in particular Mrs. Rogers and Mrs. Fletcher, were concerned that this licence was being held by somebody who really didn't have anything very much to do with the day-to-day running of the business, and they wanted it ideally to be transferred to Mr. Jodlovich and his business partner, and that was done after the beginning of these review proceedings, because although the lease is held by them personally and jointly, the business is actually run through a limited company, and I arranged for the licence to be transferred to that limited company a few weeks ago. I'm not going to attempt to defend what has gone on previously here, because the police have outlined, without putting in vast amounts of detailed evidence, the reasons for their concerns, and we accept that. The fact that a review was brought did serve as a wake-up call, particularly as the police starting point was that they didn't have confidence in the people actually operating the business, which in practical terms meant Mr. Jodlovich and his business partner rather than Mr. Singh. As you will know, their starting point was, well, we would look to revoke the licence. There was an awful lot wrong, but as I have outlined in my email of the 28th of January, a lot of work was done and a lot of money was spent to try and address a lot of the problems that had occurred. Specifically, one of the big issues that the police had was the inadequacy of the CCTV system. That's been completely overhauled. One of the difficulties were that there were two separate hard drives, neither of which really had sufficient capacity to run a sophisticated modern system. That's been changed. There is a new hard drive. There are currently 16 cameras operating 24 hours a day. And having further reviewed that, there's a need for another couple of cameras to go in, and that's in the process of happening. When I wrote on the 28th of January, I indicated that a further member of staff also needed to be trained, and that's happened. And the members of staff to which I'm referring are the two ladies sitting either side of me. There were issues with regard to the fire alarm, fire safety generally. A full fire risk assessment was undertaken by a competent person who identified a number of issues. The vast majority of them were rectified, but as I outlined, there were two things, physical things that needed doing. One was to make sure that the music muted if the fire alarm was sounded, and the second was to fit a new crash bar to one of the fire escapes. There's that phone over there, I think. The crash bar is now has now been obtained, and it just needs to be put on. But all of the other issues about lighting in the there's a corridor and steps in the fire escape route in the basement. That was unsatisfactory. Fire doors were blocked and so on. All of those have been put right. There were significant failings with regard to their incident recording. and that has been rectified. And I've been through all the records and so on and so forth, and all of that has been done. There were issues with regard to some of the SIA staff that have been working at the premises. They're no longer there. And Mr. Jolovic did get, in fact, a year ago, an SIA licence non-front line, which means that they could deploy their own SIA staff rather than having to go through a security contractor and the like. They adopted a far more responsible attitude than hitherto, in that, for example, there was a concern that they may not be able to get enough door staff to cover New Year's Eve, and so a decision was made early on that they simply weren't going to open at all. And there was something of a change of attitude. I went through the licence conditions in detail, and as you will see from pages 3 and 4 of the exchange of emails with the police, I, on behalf of the club or bar, proposed a number of amendments to tighten up the conditions, etc., and all of those were accepted, and they're agreed with the police. We also proposed that Liliana, who sits to my left, should become the DPS. She'd already got her licensing qualification, but was waiting for her disclosure certificate to come through. That arrived, and I handed earlier to Mrs. Rogers an application for her to be granted a personal licence, with the intention that she could become the DPS. As you will see, there was an exchange of emails with the police regarding this, and that's the front page. Perfectly happy with having Mrs. Ostrowska appointed as the DPS, but the sticking point really was that the police wanted the licence to be suspended for a period of time in order to allow for the other bits and pieces to be finished off, staff training, etc. And with the suggestion that the premises be relaunched with the focus of it being a more family-friendly venue, perhaps food-led or whatever. That was as recently as Thursday of last week, and was really the sticking point, because by this time Mr. Jolovic had decided that he personally couldn't continue with regard to these premises, and he had resolved to walk away, to dispose of his interests and not to have anything more to do with it. He spoke to the two ladies, both of whom work at the premises, haven't been there a huge length of time, but they have agreed that they would take it on. It's, in effect, it's almost like a management buyout and so on. And for that reason, what we then proposed was that the licence be transferred to the two ladies, and that once the licence was transferred to them, that they would appoint Liliana, here to my left, as the new DPS. You will see from the short email that Ms. Busfield sent me at 4:15 yesterday afternoon, that they supported the measures that we were now proposing, namely a transfer to Dorota Wojtas, and my mistake, it's a J, not a Y in her spelling of her surname, and to Mrs. Ostrowska, and that the licence be transferred to Liliana Ostrowska as well. They were keen to ensure that neither Mr. Jodlovich or his business partner, Mr. Bolker, had any further association with the premises. And I think it's fair to say that Mr. Jodlovich accepts that, and indeed wants to walk away from it as quickly as he can. His business partner does not play an active part in the running of the premises. In fact, since I've been involved with the premises since the beginning of December. I've seen him once, but he hasn't taken any part in the discussions or anything like that. He's more of a silent partner. They have agreed to sell the business to the two ladies, agreed an assignment of the lease that they hold. That requires the consent of Mr. Singh, who has indicated informally that he is content to do that. But there needs to be a proper agreement so that the two ladies will be buying a going concern. They will then take responsibility for all of the staff, etc. One of them will need to get a SIA certification so that they can continue to deploy door staff directly rather than having to go through a security company. If they can't do that, they're going to have to use a security company and so on. They have already done a lot of the basic stuff, like getting trained on using the CCTV system, the fire alarm system, and so on and so forth. And they are content with the measures that are there. It has been agreed, and I say this publicly, that certainly as far as Mr. Jodlovich is concerned, and the same goes for Mr. Bolker, that as from now they will not have, they will not be involved in the day-to-day running and management of the premises. They will not be working behind the bar, for example. They will not be directing staff as to what to do. There will have to be, for a period of time, some continued involvement in order to get everything handed over. Because, of course, everything at the moment is in their name, all the utility bills, rates, you name it. It's not something that can be done overnight. And for that reason, we did have discussions with the police as to whether maybe the best course was to ask you today to adjourn this hearing so that matters could be sorted out behind the scenes and then come back and invite you to take these various steps. But on balance, we came to the conclusion that that was not the best way of dealing with it. The best way of dealing with it was to get the licensing sorted out. And if you are minded to agree, I have two envelopes here, one addressed to Mrs. Rogers over there, the other addressed to Sergeant Gosling over there, and those contain all of the paperwork to transfer the licence with immediate effect to the two ladies and subject to Mrs. Rogers dealing with the personal licence application to have Mrs. Ostrowska appointed as the DPS. They were a little concerned at the idea of an adjournment because obviously they don't want to take on these premises and commit to leases and everything else so long as the licence is at risk. The police, on the other hand, really want to see there being a complete change straight away, if at all possible. Of course, that isn't possible. And the question then is, well, do we try and deal with this today? The advantage of dealing with it today is that certainly as far as the licence is concerned, the police have certainty as to who to point the finger at if anything else happens there. And they have made it very, very clear to my clients that they will be closely monitoring these premises, as indeed will Michelle Fletcher on behalf of BCP Council, and that if there is any further issues, we will be back here in any event. The other point, and please don't take this the wrong way, but it may be occurring to you, well, maybe the best thing is to go back to the police plan B, because plan A was revocation, plan B was to suspend the licence, that might be an appropriate course of action. I have to say that if that were to happen, then it puts the two ladies in an impossible situation because they rely on their employment at the moment, or their ownership of this business as it will be if you endorse all of this, for their income. They both have a young child, and if the business were to close, even for a few weeks, then any prospect that they have of being able to take it over and to pay out Mr. Jodlovich would effectively disappear. So if you were minded to do that, I'm afraid to say that the only way that we could keep it going would be to appeal the decision and then deal with all of the legal formalities and everything else to effectively transfer the business, but subject to all sorts of conditions as to that would relate to the outcome of the appeal. But as I'm sure you appreciate, that if in reality the two ladies have taken it over and during the, what's it going to be, 6-9 months before an appeal comes before the magistrates these days, it's a horrendously long period of time, that if they manage to run a clean ship, as it were, throughout that period, then although the test is whether or not the decision you make today is wrong, that test has to be taken against the background of the situation as it is at the time of the appeal, and not the time, and not as of today. That is an aspect again that Sergeant Gosling and I have discussed at length. I think both of us do not want to get into a situation where there needs to be an appeal here. We would like closure on this, and on that basis, what I would invite you to do is to indicate that on the basis that the two ladies take over the premises and that I hand over those envelopes, each of which would have immediate effect, subject only to the grant of the personal licence, then you would be content to deal with this matter by varying the licence in the manner that is set out the second half of page 3 of the long exchange of emails, which sets out the changes to all the various conditions that I have put forward on behalf of Riviera and which the police are happy with. It's an unusual situation, and I have to say that I am grateful to both Sergeant Gosling and Ms Busfield for their assistance with regard to this. There's been an awful lot of discussion going on behind the scenes. The practicalities of it have been difficult to resolve, not least the way in which these two ladies can actually take over the business and Mr Jodlovich and his partner can disappear away from there in their entirety. And I'm grateful to them for taking what I regard as being a very pragmatic approach that will address their specific concerns with regard to the personnel and management of these premises. I commend it to you. If you have any questions of any of us, then please feel free, but I will leave it at that unless I can assist you further.
Thank you, Mr Day. I have a question myself, first of all. What provision have you in place currently where the panic push bar should be installed? Clearly a panic push bar is on a designated fire escape route. And I just want
it's not locked, and you can open it, but it's a handle that has to be turned to open it. It's been like that for years and years and years. It's not as if the escape route isn't there or anything like that. It's just that it is better to just have a crash bar rather than somebody having to stop and turn a handle, as you see on some fire escapes everywhere.
Thank you, Mr Day.
Mr Day, how long do you envisage before the sale of the premises would go through?
To be perfectly honest, it depends how awkward one of the lawyers on one side or the other intends to be. It should not prove difficult to get consent from Mr Singh to transfer or assign the lease, although he may want a personal guarantee or something of that nature, which I'm sure would be forthcoming. So that can be done fairly quickly. It's drawing up an agreement to transfer the business aspect of it. It's a bit more complicated, but I would have hoped that it could be done in 3 or 4 weeks. And of course, the other aspect of that, which I didn't mention, is that whatever decision you make today can't take effect until 3 weeks after the decision notice is actually published in any event. So we do have an amount of time to sort out the legalities of getting the business handed over to the ladies and dealing with all the practical things, you know, like changing the rates and gas, electricity, etc.
My concern is that Mr. Jodlovich is still going to be there in this time, working in capacity as SIA person. Now, bearing in mind that all of these incidents have taken place on his watch, I have great concerns that this is going to carry on until such times as he's no longer involved in the business.
Let's just clarify the position with regard to the SIA. He is not frontline SIA. He is not entitled to work a door on the badge that he has got. Liliana, on the other hand, does have frontline SIA and does, on occasions, work the door. It is a good thing, without wishing to sound sexist here, to have young ladies, she's a young lady here, working the door, because people tend to be less aggressive if confronted with a lady than if they're confronted with, you know, 6'6", 20 stone of solid SIA muscle. So that is. It is really little more than a technicality in that he would be the only one at the moment entitled to say to Liliana, please work the door tonight. That's a formality. One of the other two can get their SIA deployment. It's not difficult to do that. It's more of a form-filling exercise. But it is the intention that as from now, the two ladies will run those premises, and that his involvement will only be what is absolutely strictly necessary to sign bits of paper over, to sort out things like stock taking and you know, all the other practicalities that have to take place. They are both already working there. It's not as if they're coming in from the outside, and it's just a case of him stepping back and promising you, for example, I will not be working behind the bar, I won't be telling people what to do, and the police will be keeping an eye on that. And as Sergeant Gosling mentioned to the ladies earlier on, there is now a comprehensive CCTV system in there. The conditions allow us to come in and look at that CCTV, and if we do that and we find that you're not keeping your word and that he is running the place and behind the bar, or his business partner is, then we will know it and we'll be back here in 2 minutes flat.
How long have the females been working at the premises, Mr. Day?
Liliana's been there since October of last year. How long? She's been here about 2 years working.
So they have actually been working there while some of these incidents that we're looking at today have actually taken place?
Yes, Dorota has, yes. Liliana, no.
Right. And in your statement, you revert to the fact that there have been some incidents since the review was put in. Could you tell us what those incidents were?
Yeah, there have been. There was one that took place on. Trying to work out what day it was. It was the last weekend. There was an incident outside the premises that was not connected with the premises. The police did attend, but there was a fight outside where the door staff intervened to assist. It was not connected with the premises. There was another incident which took place during the day. It was at about 5:30, where a female customer was clearly inebriated. They refused to serve her, invited her to leave. She declined to do so, and so the police were called, as is the case in any bar or pub. The licensee has a right to ring the police to say somebody's refusing to go. Please come and help me to get rid of them. So, yeah, I mean, dare I say it, this is a bar in Boscombe. It is inevitable that incidents will occur. It's a question of how they're dealt with. And I can assure you that they are being dealt with properly, that they are being properly documented. The incident book, the last incident book, I have here, and there is a marked improvement in the way in which that is completed. That's used by the SIA staff, The bar staff have separate incident logs which they use to complete details of all refusals, including the incident that I'm talking about, which is how I know about it. And they write down not just refusal for being drunk, it's everything that they've done, who did it, which members of staff were involved, description of the person, and in that particular one, records the fact that they asked the police to assist. And there are other various bits, I mean, like toilet checks. There's a very detailed log of that, which has been properly completed. All of the paperwork, as far as I could see, was perfectly in order and being maintained as it should have been maintained all along, but it's being done properly now.
Thank you. Councillor? Question from the legal department.
Mr Day, can you just clarify the position regarding the fire safety? Because there was a enforcement notice issued by the fire service, and I think then they wrote to the premises back in January saying we're giving you a further 4 weeks. Are you saying that most of that work's now done?
The main thing that they needed was a fire risk assessment, which was way out of date. The fire risk assessment has been done. I'll find it in a minute because I've got it here. The fire risk assessment has been done. The work identified in the fire risk assessment has been done, save to the extent that I set out in the response or in that first email, and the training aspect, certainly as far as these two ladies are concerned, that's already been done. That's the fire risk assessment, and the test for the fire alarm and so on, that's been done as well. I mean, can I just say that the fire risk assessment did identify other things which have been attended to.
Mr Day, can I just ask a follow-on question from that?
Yeah.
Are you able to advise us when the final bits and pieces of those works are programmed to be carried out?
As far as the training on the fire alarm is concerned, that's, well, it's ongoing, but these two ladies have already received that training and they know how to work it and they know how to work the CCTV. As I said to you earlier, the crash bar has been delivered. It is just a question of fitting it, and that is something that Mr. Jodlovich would come into the premises to do, and that can be done by the end of the week.
Yeah, we have this coming Monday fire brigade inspection, so before that time everything will be completely done.
Yeah, the fire authority's coming back in on Monday to check that everything is in order. So it will, if it's not done by then they've got a problem with the fire authority.
Does that go for the cutting off of the
yes.
As well on the fire?
Yes, that's already been booked, and he should be in. Is it day after tomorrow? He's coming to do the alarm. He was yesterday, and he said he will come tomorrow after this week, definitely. Right. He was already yesterday to check what needs to be done. So he's been in to look at it, and then he's coming back in tomorrow to do it.
So we can say that by the end of this week, those works will all be complete.
Yes.
Thank you.
And you have the reassurance of knowing the fire service is coming back in on Monday to check.
Yeah, thank you. Further question from legal.
Thank you. I've just been passed a file note from the licensing officer, which is a record of information that comes into that team. They had a telephone message on the 31st of January asking them to contact a Mr. Tim Williams, who's thinking of taking over the lease. Do you know anything about that?
Yes, I do know that. Mr. Williams rang me yesterday. I'm in slight difficulties in a public hearing in going into any more detail. My understanding of it was that he is a gentleman who has been involved not with nightclubs as such, but with the licensed trade for, he told me, a decade, and involved with outdoor events. He expressed an interest in acquiring the premises, having been put in touch with Mr. Jodlovich, by the chap who works as a DJ in the premises. He wanted to know what was happening and what the situation was with regard to the premises. I told him I was in difficulties in speaking to him for reasons of client confidentiality, but I pointed him in the direction of your website and the agenda papers for today, and suggested that he had a look at those, which he did. And at 5:45 last night, he rang me up and said, I've got about halfway through the agenda papers. I have decided that I'm no longer interested in these premises right now, but I might be interested in talking to them at some point in the future. So that had been a further complication, which has gone away.
Thank you, Mr. Day. Members have any further questions at all? No? No? Sergeant Gosling, would you like to address the committee at all? Or
I will answer.
Ms. First.
Yeah. Just to kick off the the introduction. So it's always been the intention of the Dorset Police Drug and Alcohol Harm Reduction Team to engage and support licensees throughout Dorset to promote the 4 licensing objectives of the prevention of crime and disorder, preventing public nuisance, promoting public safety and protecting children from harm. It is our expectation that all licensees will endeavour to meet these objectives and fulfil their duty as licensees, with the responsibility to uphold these objectives and meet the conditions of their premises licences. Just to explain for some people who maybe haven't been at one of these hearings recently, our team structures our engagement in an attempt to achieve the improvements within licensed premises in a really collaborative approach in order to achieve efficient improvements and ideally to avoid bringing concerns before the licensing subcommittee where possible. So we utilise what we call a 5-step engagement process, where our engagement or our involvement generally starts when we've been advised of an incident or intelligence linked to a specific premises. And you're probably aware we work very closely with our neighbourhood policing teams, members of the community, other agencies. So in the first instance, any isolated incidents or intelligence that may not be corroborated or may be unreliable, we therefore consider a premises to be under the category of interest to us. If a premises is of interest, we might send a letter to the DPS or visit, maybe with one of our neighbourhood policing officers as well. In the event, if after this visit that our concerns are heightened in any way, either through corroborating the initial report or intelligence, or we receive further reports from police officers or the public, then our interest in the premises will be escalated to the level that we call concern. At this stage, licensing officers and the licensing sergeant will discuss how it's most appropriate to manage the risk with the DPS and the premises licence holder during an arranged meeting. It's made perfectly clear, both to the DPS and the premises licence holder, at that stage that the premises is of concern. Whilst it remains the responsibility of the DPS and the premises licence holder to make improvements, suggestions that are made by police licensing officers and our partners as to the area of particular concern, we endeavour to encourage improvement during this phase. And again, collaborative working, lots of support, lots of interaction. We make ourselves available for any discussions. And this is the phase that we refer to as the problem-solving profile. Having received significant engagement and having been offered advice by Dorset Police and our partners as appropriate, if the premises continues to underperform or continues to raise concerns, then we will basically escalate the premises to a phase that we refer to as target. Once it reaches the target level, this is overseen not by us but by our inspector from the Drug and Alcohol Harm Reduction Team, and it is communicated to our partners, and it then involves a period of collating evidence towards a review. During this period, we also meet with the DPS and the premises licence holder to ensure that they fully understand the position and the Dorset Police considers that their premises is not upholding the licensing objectives. So that's just to explain the stages that we have been through, that we seek to utilise with every licensed premises that we engage with. And that is exactly the pattern of support and engagement that has resulted in us sitting here before you today. So this application has not been done lightly. It's followed a prolonged period of engagement going back to the end of 2017, before with my predecessors, but I'm referring specifically to my involvement with the premises. And it's culminated really in the serious incident of disorder that occurred on the 28th of October last year. So the application does detail every incident in great detail, sufficient detail, as we've been able to. And it also details our subsequent engagement. So I don't intend to elaborate any further on these specific incidents. We'll happily answer questions on them, but there's no need to elaborate any further on this comprehensive document which we've already submitted. Suffice to say, the Dorset Police doesn't have confidence in the premises licence holder or the DPS, who have demonstrated a sustained inability to uphold the licensing objectives. So I'm open to questions. The Sergeant will be answering questions as well.
I've just got something to add, certainly in relation to my...
Okay. Do we have any questions? Any questions of the police? No. I have no questions either, Miss Busfield. So, Sergeant Gosling.
It was really important for us for you to understand the aspects that we've gone through with the licensees, because it can take some time. Obviously, we're looking at some evidence that goes back a couple of years and longer. But it's important you understand that the processes that we go to try and avoid this today. Which brings us forward to the fact that we are here, and we obviously have a period of engagement and mediation. And it's about trying to, for us, it's about trying to meet the objective, really, of ensuring that we have safe and lawful premises in Bournemouth, Poole and Christchurch. That's really, really important to us. We are about engagement, and there are obviously occasions when we will robustly seek revocation. However, as we all understand from the Licensing Act, that's not exactly a straightforward process in itself. So we are open to other solutions and suggestions, and we will listen to all of those and judge each one on its merits against what we consider to be the threats. And I think that we've done that effectively on this occasion. It's not a perfect solution. I think everybody would understand that and appreciate that. There are risks involved. We've got 2 new persons that are proposed to take over the premises, and whilst they have got some involvement in the premises up till now, it remains to be seen how well they manage it going forward. However, they've been deemed to be fit and proper according to the Licensing Act, and as far as that's concerned, we will work with them in an effort to achieve a safe and lawful premises going forward. Our concerns do remain with, I just know them as Thomas and Mariusz, as far as the existing licensees for the premises, and anything that can be done to ensure that they are no longer part of the premises is something that we're keen to achieve, and that is something that Mr. Day has certainly strived to achieve in what he's had to agree with us, balancing, of course, the commercial reality and the challenges that exist there. So it is one for you as the committee to decide upon. We are committed to supporting people towards being safe and lawful, and I can absolutely reassure you that in the event that our ongoing engagement deteriorates or concerns continue to become apparent to us, then we will certainly bring the matter before the committee once again.
Thank you, Sergeant Gosling. Do members have any further questions at all? No? Is there anything that you wish to add at all, Mr. Day? No. Okay. No. In
Michelle.
Miss Fletcher.
Yeah, a bit difficult to comment really in light of the conversations that have taken place. You would have seen by my representation enclosed in Mrs. Rogers' report that I have accompanied Dorset Police on a number of visits. I believe 23 are documented in my report, which is a large amount to one premises, to attempt to support the DPS and his business partner in improving their operation and achieving compliance. You would have also noted the extensive support and flexibility offered by Dorset Police and the Dorset and Wiltshire Fire and Rescue, and also some with environmental health to assist the premises. With all of the above input, there has been some compliance achieved over the years, but for very limited periods. It's proven that continued compliance is something that's not achievable to date under the current management team. I still feel that the licensing objectives aren't being promoted, aren't being met, and the premises currently is not being managed effectively. I am in agreement with discussions that have taken place, and I can see why these proposals have been made. I can't make judgment on the new management. I have concerns as to how long changes with the lease would take. I think it's safe to say none of it sits comfortably. Suck it and cease is the only thing that is kind of coming to mind. I am prepared to work with my colleagues in Dorset Police and undertake further visits, but an awful lot of work has already gone into this premises, so I don't know how to wrap it up, I'm afraid. I'm sorry, but if you've got any questions, then please.
Thank you very much. Do members have any questions at all for the licensing officer? No. In which case, ladies and gentlemen, at this point I would normally say that the committee would retire, but unfortunately we have no room to retire to, and so I'd very kindly ask you if you could all just wait in the corridor, and we'll call you back in as soon as...
We can go to the members' room if you like.
Sorry, Chair. Maybe just before they disappear.
Before you all disappear.
We haven't asked the ladies any questions at all.
Sorry?
We haven't asked those ladies any questions at all.
No.
I haven't got anything to ask them.
No.
They answer mine. Next time we're staying out there because it's warmer out there, isn't it?
Ladies and gentlemen, it's been a difficult time for us to come to a decision. We have had our concerns with the way that the premises have been run before, and we also have concerns with regards to the responsibility which comes with designated premises supervisor, and the way that establishments should be run in accordance with the licensing law. However, having listened to the reports from licensing and the review called by Dorset Police and the representation by BCP Licensing, we have taken into account the mediation that has taken place between Dorset Police and Mr. Day, and agree that the conditions offered, along with the change of DPS and premises licence holder as of today, also the sale of the business and the fact that Mr. Judovich and Mr. Bolker will no longer be involved from the date of the sale, and we hope that that can be expedited forthwith. The committee agrees to modify the conditions as set out in the email of the 28th of January from Mr. Day, and vary 2.10 to read soft drinks shall be available during the cooling down period. Any questions, Mr. Day?
No, That's absolutely fine. My concern with that one was that it required hot drinks, and we didn't have a licence to do the hot drinks. But that's a sensible outcome. No, that's fine. Thank you. Thank
and
you
just
very
to
much.
add that obviously officers, and I'm sure the police will be looking at the premises very closely over the next 4 weeks, and probably in the future after that, to make sure that the premises are run in the way that they should be. There being no further business to conduct, I declare the meeting closed. Thank you.
Thank you very
If
much.
I just
sir.
do the right of appeal notice, so there is a right of appeal against this decision, and that period begins 21 days after the date of the notification in writing.